This is Jim Peterson, and Jim, would you tell us how old you were when you went into the service, and the years you were in and on the ship, and memorable moments?
Well, in June of 1960, I was a brand new graduate of Gonzaga University. I was #1 on the draft list for Park County, Montana. So I went down and saw my friendly Navy recruiter, and 2 weeks later I was in Newport, Rhode Island, going to OCS. I thought I was in a foreign country because they talk different out east. And was commissioned in December of 1960. First assignment was on the carrier Midway, home port in Alameda. I was signal officer, communication officer, and did 3 years on the Midway, 2 Westpac cruises. Then in 1963, was assigned to Fleet Training Group in Pearl Harbor, and our function there was to do operational readiness inspections on every ship that was headed for the Western Pacific. And we took all the ships through refresher training for 6 or 8 weeks, depending on the type of vessel. I was very fortunate that I had a sea daddy, Commander Joe Perry, and he arranged for me to be assigned as liaison to the Royal New Zealand Navy. So I spent 6 months in New Zealand on the New Zealand flagship, and crossed the equator, became a golden shellback, maybe one of the few U.S. Navy sailors that did it going from south to north. And left there in June of 1966, back to San Diego. Our oldest son was 2.5. Rosemary was pregnant with the #2 son. We drove from San Diego up the west coast and across the northern border to a little town north of Toronto, Ontario, dropped the wife and son off there, and headed for the Midway. And there was the United States carriers, air carriers, were on strike. So a flight from Toronto to Chicago, spent the night sleeping on the floor at O'Hare Airport. Next day went to every airline trying to get standby of the ones that were flying. Couldn't get standby. A guy came in and said, we have a chartered DC-3 that we saw at the Transportation Museum going to San Francisco. We had room for 45. Anybody want to get on? 45 guys got on. We were all servicemen. So that was another day. Then I got the bus up to Travis Air Force Base, got on a plane from Travis to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, took the bus from Travis down to Subic Bay, got in there about 7 in the morning, hadn't slept but an hour or two for 3 days, and get on board about 6 or 7 in the morning. The fellow I was relieving as navigator took me up to the bridge to introduce me to the captain, Don Stanley, great guy. And Captain Stanley says, well, new navigator, he said, you want to take the ship out? I've never driven a single screw, single rudder ship, but I'll give it a go. And Captain said, son, you can't get this ship into enough trouble that I can't get it out of. And he was great. Whoever was the officer of the deck when we were coming into port drove the ship in. Whoever was commander duty officer when you went out drove the ship out. And we had pretty fresh new ensigns that were driving the Netches in and out of port, which I don't think there were very many ships in the Navy that did that. Decided to resign my commission I was on the ship from 1966 to 67. Resigned my commission and got out, and they said, you can take a reserve commission. So what's that? Oh, just join the reserves. And I said, can they call me back in? Yeah, I said, forget it. So I had 90 days to do it. Went to work for Procter & Gamble in San Francisco. I thought, the grass may not be really as green as I think it is on the other side. So I did take a reserve commission. And so after 8 years active duty, I did 17 in the reserves. And retired as a captain in 1985. Don't regret one single minute. Wow, that's a lie. I think that most of us that serve our minds have a tendency to remember the good stuff and forget the bad stuff. Because if you don't forget the bad stuff, it'll haunt you. But consider myself very fortunate to have the opportunity to serve with some of the finest people I've ever met, officer and enlisted, and am proud to be a member of the USS Niches Association, and never have any fun at the reunions. And I really appreciate the things that everybody does. And the camaraderie is about the same as when we were on active duty, right?
Yes.
Just a great thing, great place. Recommend, I think, every young man and woman in this country should have mandatory service, whether it's public service, working in hospitals, working on the infrastructure of the country, or in the military. And I just feel that way. I think that we all have to pay back for what our forefathers earned for us, and that's all I've got to say. And I hope the
Appreciate it,
camera
Jim.
picked up the fact that we're almost twins.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim.
You bet.